What if China's push to reclaim Taiwan isn't just about politics, but about finishing a dynastic struggle that began over a century ago, one that could drag the world into a new age of conflict? Before we dive into this story of unfinished empires and modern superpowers, make sure to subscribe to Dynasty Chronicles. Here, we uncover the battles, ambitions, and legacies of the world's greatest powers, past and present. In the summer of 1995, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic standoffs of the modern age. China moved troops into Fujian province, just across the narrow strait from Taiwan. Missiles were tested on live television, and mock invasions were carried out on beaches eerily similar to Taiwan's own coastlines. To the world, it was saber-rattling. To China, it was something deeper. Taiwan was not a neighbor, it was a lost province, a reminder of an unfinished civil war. In Beijing's view, Taiwan wasn't a country at all. It was a rebellious territory, a piece of dynastic land. That had slipped away, the timing was no coincidence. Taiwan's president had just been granted a visa to the United States, humiliating Beijing. Taiwan was about to hold its first democratic election, a symbol of independence that China could not tolerate. But the dragon's roar was silenced by an even louder presence. The United States responded with overwhelming force. Aircraft carriers, missile destroyers, and warships swept into the Taiwan Strait, the largest show of American power in Asia since Vietnam. The message was clear: back down. And in the 1990s, China did, but history never ends. It evolves. Fast forward to decades, the world was no longer the same. China's economy had exploded, and its military had transformed from a regional force into a global competitor. Instead of testing missiles for TV, Beijing now sent swarms of fighter jets into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Day after day, hundreds of times a month, Chinese aircraft crossed the invisible line. It was not just a military maneuver, it was a symbolic act of dominance, a reminder to Taiwan and to the world of who claimed ownership of the skies. And unlike the 1990s, when American intervention forced Beijing to retreat, this time China did not stop. The flyovers multiplied. Each act was a statement. The balance of power has shifted. For centuries, China's rulers from the Ming to the Qing saw reunification of fractured lands as a sacred duty. In their eyes, a dynasty could only be legitimate if it held the mandate of heaven and ruled over all its rightful territory. Taiwan became part of this pattern of legitimacy. Today, the Communist Party sees itself as the inheritor of that dynastic tradition. Its mandate is not heavenly, but ideologically, the principle is the same. The last remnant of division must be erased. In 2005, this vision was put into law. China passed the anti-secession law, declaring that if peaceful reunification with Taiwan became impossible, the state was obligated to use non-peaceful means. In other words, invasion. Peaceful reunification looks increasingly impossible. In Taiwan, support for joining China has collapsed to historic lows. To Beijing, time is running out. So what happens if the dynastic mission turns to war? Opening act would likely be subtle. Another routine Chinese flyover, something Taiwan has seen countless times before. But this time, missiles would streak across the strait. Ballistic and cruise missiles would rain down on Taiwan's radar stations, airfields, command centers, and power grids. The goal: cripple Taiwan before it can fight back. Within hours, Taiwan's leaders would retreat underground into command bunkers. Their air force, smaller but resilient, would scramble jets from bases hidden in mountains. Missiles would be fired back across the strait at Chinese radar and air bases. On the beaches of western Taiwan, soldiers would lay mines and dig defenses, awaiting an amphibious assault. Meanwhile, China's fleet's warships, ferries, even civilian cargo vessels would set out across the strait, carrying hundreds of thousands of troops and supplies. Amphibious invasions are among the hardest operations in warfare, but with overwhelming numbers, China would attempt to break through. Here lies the dynastic echo. Just as emperors of old sent armies to reclaim rebellious provinces, Beijing's strategy would be to overwhelm through sheer force, prove that resistance is futile. But history teaches that great powers do not watch idly when rivals expand. In Washington, leaders would face a fateful choice: risk American lives for an island thousands of miles away, or step aside and watch us credibility collapse. The ambiguity that has long defined U.S. policy's strategic uncertainty would suddenly be tested. Aircraft carriers from Japan and Guam would likely deploy. Submarines would hunt Chinese transport ships. Allies such as Japan and Australia would join, unwilling to let China dominate the Pacific. And so, two nuclear powers would clash head-on. From here, the conflict could spiral far beyond Taiwan. Chinese strategists themselves anticipate it. Some writings predict that India might seize the chance to press its Himalayan border claims. Others imagine Tibetan groups rising in revolt. In the chaos of war, old wounds resurfaced, just as they did in the dynastic collapses of the past. But let us not forget the human reality. Behind the grand strategies are millions of civilians. Every missile strike would hit not only military targets, but cities, homes, and families. Taiwan, one of the world's most advanced economies, could be plunged into chaos. The global trade system, already fragile, would collapse overnight. Echoes of dynasties past become clear. History is filled with rulers who believed they were destined to reclaim lost lands. They believed it would bring glory, but it often brought ruin, and yet the scenario cannot be dismissed. China's leadership views Taiwan not merely as territory, but as the unfinished chapter of a long dynastic story. To them, reunification is not optional, it is destiny. The tragedy is that once war begins, it rarely obeys destiny. It follows its own brutal momentum. Miscalculation, a single spark, can unleash a storm no leader can control. We live in a time that feels stable, where international rules and treaties appear unshakable. But this sense of order is an illusion of peace. The truth is that great power conflicts have been the rule of history, not the exception. Dynasties rose, clashed, and fell over struggles just like this. So when we ask, what happens if China invades Taiwan? The answer is not only about missiles and warships. It is about whether the modern world can finally break free from the cycle that has haunted dynasties for centuries. The belief conquest is the only path to legitimacy. Because if that cycle repeats, the cost will not only be borne by China and Taiwan, but by the entire world.